It's me. I'll tell you what, that camera ain't going. Come on, camera. Mm-hmm. Well. I don't know, guys. I'm working on it. Well, shit.
Yeah. Hey, Isaac, hold up. I got two different methods.
Didn't do shit.
Well, the thing is I pulled up the one and Isaac's on this other one. We're going to get a lot of feedback because we got too much.
That's because, yeah, we're on both. So I'm closing the Firefox one. Okay, so this is a little bit different. This is looking promising. Did you fix
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
Love you.
Huh.
Now why the hell?
What the heck's going on here? I got it jumping all over the place. Isaac, you hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Just you and me, huh?
I guess.
I
Can you
just
not
had
hear me?
Romy.
Oh, I can hear you now, Rome.
Yeah, I can hear you, Rome.
Okay,
Just can't see you.
that's why, because it's... Okay, so I am using a
There you
fucking
go.
webcam that's mounted to my laptop, and my laptop has fucking tape over the thing. So, makes perfect sense. But the camera on the laptop's a piece of shit anyway.
Right. That's fine. Oh.
Well, it's looking like Half Pint's needing a different link
Okay.
sent to him for this chat that we're currently in. Because right now it's just, and I haven't seen Pat hook into this one yet either.
Okay. Yeah, I have 0 viewers right now listed. Now I can. It's so ridiculous. I'm in the Hangout portion right now. Now I can share this YouTube link, and that will make sense. Yeah.
Okay, so basically, we'll be here, and all the comments will be going on through YouTube. Yes,
I think so.
I'm good with that. We have a way
Yeah,
to
but-
communicate with everyone. Okay.
But we still need Logan on this panel.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, hold on. I gotta take a firearm off. My ass is hurting.
Okay, are you both on your laptops
Yeah.
or some kind of computer?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm on a computer. Mhm.
Okay.
I'm at my desktop or my laptop. Yeah. And the thing is Logan should be on his laptop. He's working in the war room. And it sounds like we're going to have somewhat of an audio lag also here, look, Isaac.
Well, what you'll want to do if you're looking at the YouTube page as well for chat info,
Okay.
you are going to want to mute that, or you'll hear your audio twice. You'll hear it from the Hangouts, and then you'll hear it from the YouTube Live.
Where is the YouTube link?
Okay, so our YouTube link is. Have you got the chat up on the Hangout?
Yes, I have the chat up on the side.
All right, there it is.
Live attempt too. I like that. Okay.
Well, we had to shoot for something.
Okay. I will chat on this one. Yeah, that's definitely a bit of a lag. I'm sitting here watching you scratch my face from like 5 minutes ago.
Yeah. It's pretty close.
I'm just going to say on the Hangouts this way, because like I said, we're getting an audio feedback here. Because I can still hear myself talking on about a 2-second delay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and post this link if that works, and we're ready to go.
Yep, go for it.
Kind of sound like I'm talking to a radio on Battlestar Galactica too, which I find humorous.
Right? Oh, God. What we got here? Oh, there I can just scroll down away from the video and just view the chat. It's kind of nice.
Oh, mine's off to the side here. It just came up with a toolbar off to the side.
If you take the page off of maximize, float it in a window, and then narrow it down so it's not taking up your entire screen width, then it'll pop the chat down below, and then you can scroll down. I would also recommend definitely muting that channel, but also or muting the YouTube video, but also lowering your resolution so you're not eating up bandwidth.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure it out here, Isaac. We wanted to go to the control room.
No, actually, if you have the YouTube link up.
No, I don't have the YouTube link up at all. I'm just.
Then don't worry about it.
I'm just solely on this one.
Okay, yeah, you're good then.
I'm on this, and then I had the face still pulled up because I wasn't sure if we were going to have to jump back to that.
Right.
Okay. Okay.
somebody watching the Facebook page too?
I
It
am.
looks like Steve just asked for the YouTube link. I just got the notifications rolling by at the bottom of my screen here
Yeah,
with this.
I posted that a little bit ago on the main area. So hopefully we have that. All right. So we've been live for a little while. Welcome to the shit show.
Damn straight.
All
Am I
right.
saying that we're still off air?
Is it?
Up in the corner of my screen, it says off air.
No, we're good.
Are we? All right.
That off air will light if we're off air, I believe.
Because I've got,
I
yeah, down
wasn't
at the
sure.
bottom on YouTube, it shows live.
Okay.
So yeah, we should be live. If we are not live, some of the 6 people watching should definitely put a comment in to let us know that we are live, since we had such a lovely start to this.
That ain't no kidding. And like I said, we're still waiting on Logan to hopefully get this figured out. He should be hooked into the laptop.
Dylan says we're live.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just seeing it up in the corner saying that off air. I wasn't sure if that was needing to be lit up or not.
Yep.
That's the only reason I was saying that.
Oh no, we're live.
And it looks like we've got about a 60-second delay in between. I know there was a setting for that, so just keep an eye on that for the next one. So this time, I'm good. I can deal with it.
Yeah, I'm good with it. I mean, a 60-second delay, at least it gives us some buffer to give
Like I
people
say,
the
I'm
opportunity to
keeping
get
an eye
their
on the-
question in.
I'm going to keep an eye on the comments section, so I'm the only one that'll have to deal with it at all. Yeah, Logan's still having some difficulties. But, oh well, let's get this show started since we're finally here. Okay. All right. So, welcome to the first and hopefully shittiest running Iowa's Earth Hangout. This one is going to be based on various communications as far as codes and radios and things of that nature. So, I'm going to let Isaac just take it away for a little while. If you have questions, go ahead and throw them in the side chat, and I'll get them to Logan. Or Isaac. It's been a long night. Take it away, Isaac.
All right. So the big thing I would say is I think communications really is an essential issue for us to all look at and prepare for. Honestly, if you are going through any kind of a situation, whether it's a localized emergency, whether it is a broad emergency, whether that is a national emergency, communications will be the key factor in that. In the event that just simply your local area is affected, the ability to communicate with the other people inside of that area is essential. When the scope of that becomes much larger, then the ability to transmit information between your location and any other outside groups that may be able to contribute or assist you, that's really going to be the most important thing. And so there are plenty of times where you have somebody who is preparing for some situation. We all try to be as prepared as we can be, whether it's with tactical training, whether that is with firearm training, whether that is with survival or bushcraft. But the fact is, if you can't coordinate between yourself and the other groups, that you may work with, or the other individuals that you may work with, or any law enforcement agency that may be involved, any first responders that may be involved, then you're really preparing to fail. Generally, I mean, you could say, oh, I'm going to go out on my own and I'm going to continue to do that for as long as possible. But the fact is, ultimately, you will still need to work with someone else. And so that's where that's important. There are plenty of ways to work comms into your, whether it's just a standard prep, whether it's improving and adding on to the training that you're doing currently. You can go to any, farm and fleet store or a Tyson's or a Walmart or wherever. You can pick up something as simple as the Bubble Pack two-way radios. Those are a kind of like a, amped up walkie-talkie. Now, those are really, really low-powered voice communication devices. They're generally less than 1 watt of power output. They have a little stubby antenna, the size of your thumb maybe. And those devices just don't go that far. Now you might see something on there, and it's a real common misconception, because it might say has a range of 36 miles. The thing is, the radio waves that those use are really, really tiny. Those devices use a radio wave where the entire wave itself is at most 70 centimeters at its peak from top to bottom. And that means that that's all the bigger the wave is. If it runs into something, it's going to stop. And so that's what we call line of sight. And line of sight radio waves, because they are so small and they don't pass through objects, and it's too small to get around a large object, you need to be able to see something. So if they say it's 36 miles worth of range, that is a best case scenario. If you were standing on a mountaintop and the person you were talking to was standing on another mountaintop and there was nothing in between you, you could maybe go 36 miles. Really, though, that's wishful thinking. Now, as you get into some bigger devices, so as you move up into things like GMRS, which is those channels are usually included in those little bubble pack radios, but technically you're not supposed to use those unless you have a license for that. And so that's certainly something that you want to invest in. The licenses for that are incredibly cheap. GMRS license is only about $70, and that is a 10-year license, last I checked. So essentially, you get that license. It covers your household. It covers your family. The wording of the FCC is incredibly just deliciously vague. So it basically just says this license covers your family. And they may have cleaned it up because they did do a little bit of modification to the GMRS licensing over the past year here. Back in September, I believe they did an update to that. But basically, you could allow that to cover for anybody. So you can go through and say, "Oh, this is a GMRS license. It covers me and my whole family." Those radios are much higher powered. Those can be 4 to 5 watts now. So you're talking, a significant amount more power than these little half-watt devices otherwise. And that power helps get you past some bad environmental conditions. It helps push those signals through some things that they just may not get through otherwise. So that's going to be more flexible. Now, the other great thing with GMRS is that it gives you the ability legally to have a repeater. And a repeater is basically exactly what it sounds like. It repeats the information that it gets in. So if we were to put up a repeater in one area, whether say that's your command and control structure or vehicle, and you put up a large high antenna, then you're going to be able to extend that reach, because if you can radio into that repeater, the repeater rebroadcasts everything you say back out among the larger area. And so by adding a repeater on a decent sized or a decent height antenna with a good amount of power to rebroadcast, a repeater with a 50-watt output, which is legal for GMRS with that $70 license, can give you 50 miles around that. And so you really gain a lot of flexibility. You gain a lot to do that. Those are the two simplest ways of getting easy handheld communication through that. The thing with an
Okay,
FRS
so
radio is
let me break in here quick with the
worthless.
question. I'm multitasking now. So
You bet.
now that license, that GMRS license, the $70 one.
Yep.
I tried to get that the other day. I went through and looked online, but I could not find the link for it anywhere. Do you have that link you could throw up in the chat?
Yeah. Let me pull that up here, and we will get that all set.
Okay.
So, getting the GMRS license is pretty straightforward. Essentially, you file an application with the FCC, you pay your $70 fee. There's no testing, there's no exams. The way that you do that is through the FCC system called the ULS. It's the Universal Licensing System. And basically that manages all of the various licenses that you have. So for me, it's my GMRS license, it's my ham licenses, all of those things. And in that ULS system, basically you register in that system and you get a federal registration number, an FRN, and basically that's just your kind of like a registration for being able to submit to various federal resources without everybody having to have a totally separate kind of system for that. So
Okay. We got a question.
yeah.
Pat wants to know if we can all take the test as a group. Well, I guess what does it take to put on the class and to put on the test for this license? As far as the ham, not so much the GMRS.
Right, because the GMRS doesn't require any kind of a license there or an exam. So there are groups that will put on a class and let you take the test right away. To administer an exam for a license, for a ham amateur license, you have to have what are called VEs, or volunteer examiners. And those are people that have been vetted by the ARRL, the American Radio Relay League, and the FCC, that are qualified and competent to do that testing. Generally, it's pretty well received, and so these classes can get put on. It really just depends on the person teaching the class. So I can go through and teach a class and teach everybody the basics and say, hey, here's all this stuff. The actual test for a ham license is a little more in-depth than that. A lot of it is really common sense. You could definitely walk in off the street and with the right pool of questions, just nail the test right out. But there are a lot of kind of really goofy questions about actual FCC regulations and specifics. Most of those are things that you'll never need to know again in your life.
So it doesn't ask anything about like antennas or bandwidth or any of that stuff?
It will. There are several different sections. I can't recall exactly how many offhand.
Okay, because I've looked at the stuff as far the stuff I got from you a while back as
Yeah.
far as learning the antennas and
Yep.
different lengths and bandwidths and all that stuff, and it makes my brain fry.
Yeah.
So,
Honestly, I think everybody has some of that when they first start looking into it. So you start off and you are looking at this stuff and you're going, oh man, I have different restrictions depending on what part of the bands I'm using. I have a technician license. I can't use any voice traffic in a band lower than 10 meters. And then you sit there and go, God, what does that even mean? I don't even know what that means. So one of the ways that you can prepare and study for those tests, the nice thing is that the actual pool of questions and the answers are all freely available. I mean, they're all announced ahead of time. They change every few years, but they're all available for anybody to use and view. And so because of that, people make apps for Android, for iPhone, and websites where basically you just go through and you start just hammering the information from each question into your head so that you know, okay, if I get any of these questions, I have them. And so you can go through and continue to take these practice tests and run through everything until you're fairly confident that you know everything. Now, that will give you the information you need to pass the test. It doesn't necessarily mean that you actually know what you're doing. But a lot of that, it's just like, it's just like riding a motorcycle. You can do all the book learning that you want to do about that stuff. But until you start to get real world experience with it and you are experimenting with different things and you're trying those different antennas and you're trying different configurations out, there's only so much benefit that you can get from that.
But
The point that it gets really hard is when you get the more advanced licenses. If you're going to get an extra license, which gives you all the options you can have within the U.S. licensing system for radio, then it gets really complex. At that point, you're really, they want to know the math behind how you're making things work and all of that stuff. For the technician license, a lot of it is just remembering what section a specific part of the law comes from. It's kind of goofy, but it's not terribly hard. And that's why they have like those one-day training classes where you hammer home all the information you're really going to need to pass the test and then take the test. So.
okay. So for a guy like me,
Yeah.
I've got the Baeofeng, however you say it right.
Yeah.
You programmed it, but let's say you didn't program it. I just took it out of the box and I'm going to start playing with it.
Yep.
How do I do that? Where should I start looking for this information? What buttons should I start pushing? Okay, let's say I've got the basic ham license even, but I still have no clue what I'm doing. Because like I've said before in our previous comments, as it sits right now, it's a cool piece of kit, and I'm sure it's useful, but I don't know how the hell to use it. So if shit hits the shit, I'm just going to dump it for something I can actually use.
Right. Well, and that's kind of the problem with not having a license and not being able to practice, is that you lose that ability to play around with something and get a feel for it and really understand how it works. So there are a few different things that you would do on the Baofengs. And honestly, the first thing that I would do, or the first place that I would go for information on those, is a website called myclor.com, MIKLOR.com. Essentially,
Isaac.
yeah.
I actually YouTubed it. It's Baeofengs for Dummies, and that's I'm 100% dead serious here now. But it actually walked us through the 5 pluses.
Yeah,
it's the one that we just recently bought here, and it shows you step by step of what each button actually uses, where it's going.
Right.
It shows you how to change all your frequencies and stuff like that.
Right.
So if you're more of a visual learner, that'd be the place to go. I know they came with the booklets and everything else, but to be honest, they're confusing just as much as half the writing on the box.
So the Baeofeng company in China, licenses their radios out to a number of different places, and they can still be sold as just Baofengs. But there is one specific company in the U.S. called Baofeng Tech, or B-Tech is their website, btech.com. And not only do they repackage the radios or package them for the American market in the U.S., but they redo the owner's manual and the user's guide for English, so that you're not getting some kind of strangely translated Chinese menu that doesn't make sense. One of the cool things,
the other problem with Baeofeng Tech
mm-hmm.
is they're the ones that put the reducers in to the Baofengs that they sell here in the States. This way you can't access those other broadbands. I'm saying is, for the people that are buying it from the European company,
mm-hmm.
they're coming in and no change is done. They can access those oddball frequencies in the middle. But the ones that are actually bought from Baeofeng Tech here in the States, they actually have the limit that won't allow you to access, I think it's like 35 to, or 135 to 147 or something like that. There's that little range in there that they cut out on the newer Baofengs
mm-hmm.
because of that lawsuit that they had last year or 2 years ago. I'm just saying is, the guys that have the older version are going to have a little bit more range, more play to theirs compared to the guys that buy them from 2 months ago, 3 months ago to now. Is because they went through and did that rechange over and put that limiter in there.
Yeah.
And a lot of guys aren't putting that in consideration.
Well, I wouldn't be terribly concerned about that. The lower you go on that frequency and you drop out below the 2-meter range, which is the standard VHF frequency set for a ham radio, the lower you go on the frequency, the taller your radio wave is, the bigger your bandwidth is. And so your ability to actually transmit that with that small radio, the Baofengs are incredibly flexible and cheap, but they also don't do a stellar job at rejecting bad RF. They don't do a great job at selectivity, which is only hearing frequencies that you're tuned into. And so as you get out of that range, because they're able to go in that range, but they're not made to use it, then their ability to be a good radio diminishes greatly. I have a lot of love for Baofengs because they are giving so many people an option into the radio world that you didn't have before. Before Chinese manufacturers came on the scene, if you wanted something more than a cheap blister pack walkie-talkie radio, you were spending $200 or more. And so it shut down people who were interested in the entire thing, whether it's comms, whether it's prep, whether it's anything else. They just weren't willing to lay that kind of money out to say, oh, it's something I kind of want to play with. With a Baofeng that you can pick up for, depending on the vendor, anywhere between $25 and $65 based on the model and the vendor, then you open that up and people are more willing to play around with that. So I wouldn't be too worried about losing some of those interstitial frequencies. The fact is, Baofeng Tech they really do a hell of a job with providing everything that you'll really need. But they're an American company and they have to play by those rules. Now, anybody who imports those radios via Amazon or anything else, they should be, playing by those rules too. But yeah, that's a gray area. But
so, now there is that if you get that $70 GMRS license you were talking about, there are features on these Baeofengs that you can use.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can take a Baeofeng and you can, rate limit it down in software and just use these, transmit on those frequencies. Again, that's also a bit of a gray area. It's licensed for ham use. It's licensed for amateur use is the FCC licensing that it has. But it's been pretty rare that I've ever seen anybody be concerned about using a Baeofeng on the GMRS frequencies. And honestly, you can use any radio to listen. So listen away, no matter what. And then in the event that there truly is some kind of, life or death emergency situation, most of those licensing rules go out the window. If there's a serious threat to life or your person, then you can use any means you need to. So you can do whatever you want to at that point. I wouldn't use it as an excuse to do things. I wouldn't say, "Oh my God, I got chased by a bobcat, so I'm going to start talking on the 2-meter band," for no good reason. Don't make shit up. But you can make that radio technically fit within those licensing guidelines for GMRS, and honestly, that's what a lot of people do, and I see no issue with that.
All right. So now on those Baeofengs, I know they have the upgraded antennas that everyone recommends getting and the different battery
Yep.
packs and things like that. Is there any
Yeah.
other considerations aside from those that you should think about when getting one of those radios?
Most people are sticking with the UV5R or the F8HP, which is the newer, higher powered version of that. Goes to it's an 8-watt radio instead of a 4 to 5 watt. And honestly, the antenna matters more than the power that you have. The actual radiated power of your device. So if you've got a little stubby antenna on there and you're trying to put out 8 watts, you're not really going to do that well. But if you have a decent sized antenna cut for that frequency at 8 watts, you're going to put out a lot more, even at less. So if I leave one radio on at 2 watts and have a good antenna on there, my actual radiated power is going to be 4 watts or 6 watts or whatnot. The antenna matters just as much as anything else, and that'll matter not just in handheld radios, but in man pack radios or in radios that get down into lower frequencies. Then you really have antennas being the bigger focus on that. I've got a 1500 watt amplifier for my HF radios that I use only occasionally. Really, when conditions require me to have more power to push through bad propagation or bad band conditions.
Okay.
Generally, the antenna is the thing that matters most. So I can run this and have a vertical antenna just as a kind of a emergency setup, and I still won't be able to hear nearly as well if I had a bigger, more flexible antenna.
Yeah.
And even so, I'm broadcasting from a smaller antenna or an emergency antenna, and it's not going to go out nearly as powerfully. So having that right antenna matters a lot. So honestly, I would say the antenna is the most important thing. It's going to improve your reception. It's going to improve your ability to transmit. So that's the biggest thing.
We've had a question on the extended batteries for the Baeofengs.
Yep.
So, because I know I've seen the extended battery packs, I've seen the AA battery packs, and then the standard battery packs.
Yep.
So I figure let's go ahead and start talking about power considerations. You want to go ahead and take it away with the battery packs real quick?
Yeah. So the battery packs are you know, the base battery pack is fairly small, but it will last for quite a while. Generally, your power use in radio, the bulk of that power use is going to come from transmission. So when you're transmitting, that's when you're eating up that power. If you leave a radio on just for receiving and you're mainly just listening, that's going to last much, much longer. So the Baeofengs that I have sitting around with a base battery pack, and here, give me a second. So let's say that I've got this guy here. That's one of the uprated antennas. That is the Nagoya. It's the NA24J, and it's their super flexible one. And it's able to go wherever you need to stick that. So, but that's nice and flexible. The battery pack on this, though, this radio is still running right now. And I don't think I have actually charged this radio since, I don't know, March of last year. So they'll last for a considerable amount of time just doing receiving. And that's the bulk of what that radio does.
Because they usually use more power to transmit than they do to receive, correct?
Right. And so if you're going to be doing a lot of transmitting, or not even a lot, but just a reasonable amount of back and forth between people, then having that larger battery is going to make a big difference. And so that's my daughter Lex. So having that battery is going to make a difference because you're going to get that much more out of it. Now, the difference in the battery sizes on there, you're looking at generally double the capacity with the extended battery pack. And I'd have to look exactly to see, but I don't think it's much more than about 1,200 milliamp hours on the base battery.
Mike's trying to show us right now.
Yeah, what's up, bud?
Well, I just got the UV5R.
Yep.
Just a standard issue UV5R with a standard issue battery. We're sitting here looking at the peak capacity is 1,800 milliamps. So you're looking at 1,800. No, 1,800 milliamps. So at a broadcast of 1 amp, you're looking, if you continuously use it at 1 amp for 1 hour, you got 18 hours on this thing, essentially. But receiving, you're only using what? Not even a quarter of the amperage there.
Yeah, it's barely anything.
Yeah, you're not going to be really running into too much problems on just a standard battery as long as you're not doing a whole bunch of broadcasting like you're saying.
Yep.
I was just using the 5R because I know I have a standard battery on that, and I was just looking to see what the capacity was on it. So we had some sort of number to relate it to.
Yeah, the extended batteries, the standard extended batteries are they're usually like 2,400 or 2,800, or I'm sorry, 3,800 milliamp hours. So you get a nice boost out of that by going to those. It also makes the radio much more substantial to hold and to just use. The UV5R is pretty small. And so if you've got big hands or if you need to grab it quick, it's tough to get to it because you're talking about a radio that's like the size of most microphones. And so that's one of those things where I would say just having that battery for extended grip ability and handle ability is a pretty big deal. The AA battery packs are nice in the event that you have just access to AA's, that you're not tied to your charger and using that. And that gives you that extra flexibility. So I have one of those. I have a standard battery and I have the extended battery. And that way I can have multiple options for that. And I also have one that slots into the battery slot, but runs out to a 12-volt plug for a car, like a cigarette lighter plug. And that way you can use the radio in the vehicle, not eat up your battery. It just powers it directly.
So I remember when we did the nationwide bug out and we were doing the radio net.
Yep.
We had a generator to power the entire system. Now, what are the other options as far as power, and what do the normal, like your base radios that you'd have sitting at home or in your vehicle, what kind of power do they use?
They use a lot more. So let me, I'm going to grab the camera. Hey, camera. Sorry. So if you take a look at the radios, and you probably won't even be able to see this here just because it's too lit. But yeah, that's what I thought. Darn thing. I'm going to turn it off. So my power supply here for my base radios is a 30 amp max power supply, and I've got my little view meter here that essentially tells me how much power I am pulling. And so if I leave it on, I turn radio on and let it sit, I'm pulling about 2 amps right now, and you can't see it, obviously now, but I'm pulling about 2 amps. If I key that up though and put out at full power, I'm going to take around 21 amps. Now, every radio is ultimately a little bit different. So even though I have multiple rigs that are, this rig here is a Kenwood, this one up here is another Kenwood, this one down here is a Japanese Alinco, they all pull a slightly different amount of power, but average for a 100 watt radio, you generally expect to pull about 20 to 25 amps when transmitting. When receiving, it's about 1 to 2 amps.
Okay.
So
now, are all the radios running on DC, and that's just like an inverter then?
Yeah. So there are a handful of base radios that are just pre-wired for AC, and you plug in and you just let it go. The majority, though, you run a couple of power supplies, a power supply with a couple of just positive, negative lead or positive ground lead that goes into the radio's power line, and then that power supply does the conversion for you. But the majority of radio accessories and radios themselves expect 13.8 volts, but will work within that range of difference there. So you basically can power it just off of a car battery, which is nice then, because you get to have the option of charging a bank of batteries from solar or from some other method and having that as your reserve.
As long as you can keep that car battery topped off, you're good to go. So whatever method you could use, and say it should hit the fan to top off a car battery, you can use that to run your radio. So we've got a couple of basically comments to the radio class that I keep bugging you about. So just make a note of that. There's more bugging for that.
Okay.
So let's say, scenario, shit's hit the fan, your Baeofeng's dead. It's deader than disco, doesn't work.
Yeah.
You come across a radio.
Yep.
You come across a car battery that's charged, and you can keep it charged.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do for an antenna? Is there a simple way to figure out what you need for the antenna, or is it just kind of a crapshoot? How's that work?
Okay, so the majority of the antennas out there that you're going to use for um, ham radio or CB, because CB is basically those frequencies live within the bands, in between a couple of bands in the ham world. And honestly, the only reason the CB isn't terribly usable is because they only build those radios to run those few frequencies and at very low power, which is why you can't just grab a CB antenna and stick it on a ham radio and let it work. When you have a mismatch in an antenna and a transceiver or transmitter, then what happens is out into that antenna, if that antenna isn't cut right, if it's not the right length for broadcasting out that radio signal, some of that gets reflected back to your radio. And so that's the SWR, the signal wave ratio. So you always look at that with a radio and you go, oh, is going to give me a bad SWR. That means that my actual power going out is only 60 watts instead of 100. But that means that 40 watts of that power I'm trying to put out are getting sent back down the line and into the internals of my radio, which is why it's really important to tune your antenna, to have that tuned properly. Now, if you know what frequency you're going to transmit on, there are a couple of really simple things that you can an antenna. So you can just use a spool of wire and run that out, but you want to make sure that the wire is the right length for whatever you're doing. So if you are just going to use 2 pieces of wire, one as your ground section, one as your transmission section, and they're the same length, that's considered a dipole antenna. 2 poles, one for transmission, one for the ground portion. And basically you just cut the length of that, the total length, to the right length for the frequency that you're going to be transmitting on. And so it may not be perfect, but it'll be close enough that you can get something done. Now, if you're only receiving, that length doesn't matter nearly as much.
So by cutting it to the length that you're wanting to send on, what do you mean by that?
Okay, so if you figure that, let's see here. So if we calculate the antenna length, and there's a number of different things there, but the formula for calculating an antenna length is the length in meters equals 300 divided by your frequency in megahertz. So basically, you take your frequency in megahertz. For CB, that's around 27 megahertz. And so you would take 300 divided by 27, and then that would give you in meters how long that antenna needed to be. So if you wanted to look at that, the thing with ham radio at those lower frequencies, though, where CB is that if you look at that band, they call bands by meters, and the different meters are the size of the radio wavelength that you're talking about. So CB radio essentially fits into the 11-meter band. That means that if you had a radio antenna for CB that was the full size of the radio wave itself, it would be 11 meters long. And most of us can't drive around with an 11-meter antenna on our car or have one handy to use. And so what they have found over time is that a quarter wave antenna tends to be very efficient on most all frequencies, which is why a handheld radio that's 2 meters doesn't have a 2-meter antenna on it. It's got an antenna that's about 1.5 feet to be a quarter wave. So you work that up that way. So you basically take that formula, 300 divided by the frequency you're going to be on in megahertz, get you your meters, and then divide that by 4. And that will get you a reasonable antenna that you can use. So that's why when they do communication with submarines, that's in the VLF area of the frequencies. So it's below like it's below AM radio stations. It's like crazy low. And the antennas for that are monstrous. The US put together this array of antennas that were 3 miles long to do very low frequency communication with submarines. So you need to pick that pretty well. And then when you get to the point where you're using those HF radios, you really need to choose your frequency also based on the conditions. So if you are transmitting during the day, a higher frequency might work fine. But as night falls and the atmosphere, the layers of the ionosphere change, and it changes the way that those waves are reflected, you need to go lower and lower and lower in your frequencies. So as the sun goes down, your frequencies go down. I mean, those are simple ways to look at it. And that's one of those things where, like you said, you can look at antennas and bandwidth and just be blown away and go, oh God, I don't know what the hell that means. But that's a simple thing. That's one of those things that they taught in the Navy, basically, was as the sun goes down, lower your frequency, go lower on the dial. And so there's lots of little things like that. You don't need to know everything, but you need to be at least proficient in that. And it's just like anything. It's just like being a firearm operator. It's just like being a driver or any other skill that you're going to have. You don't need to be the best at everything. You don't need to know exactly why everything does what it does. The more you know, the more flexible you'll be.
Right.
Pardon me. But you don't need to know everything for sure.
I have one more question, then we'll move on from the radios topic.
Yeah.
The question was if you could make a list of the cheapest price, best quality stuff around, which is sometimes an oxymoron, but
Yeah.
basically I answered with the Baeofeng kit that we found.
Yep.
If you wanted to get like a base station set up, kind of like an in-home or an in-vehicle, what should a guy look for as far as radio and stuff like that?
So there are a couple of different options for that. Now, with the handheld stuff, I think Baofengs they're like the high point of the radio world. And don't get me wrong, because I love my high points, but they're great. They're great utensils, and the Baofengs are the same way. They're incredibly flexible. They're incredibly cheap, which means you can buy 4 of these for the price of almost any other radio out there, and have one at home and in your car and in your bug out bag, and you can have them stash one at work. That makes them really flexible for that. But like I said, there are some limitations to it as well. They just don't do a great job at rejecting certain signals. They aren't as flexible with certain tasks that you may want to put those through. They've gotten better, but they're not perfect. If I were going to step up from the Baofeng, there are 2 steps that I would go. The first one is if you're going to move beyond the UV5R and get something else, then I would do one of these, and that's the UV82. And Baofeng Tech has the UV82 HP, which is a 8-watt radio. Actually, that's what this one is. It's built significantly better. It feels more substantial. It is the materials in the actual build of the radio are much higher. It's heavier. It is built to a better standard as far as being able to handle dust and water, things like that. So that's much nicer, and they're usually about $60. I think is about what I paid for most of these. If I were going to step up from that, and pardon me while I walk over here and grab my other radio.
I'm waiting for that cord to snatch him and make him fall back like in the cartoon.
Oh God! So the next one I would look at is the Alinco DJ 500. This thing is
Alinco?
Alinco, Alinco. Now, Alinco is a Japanese radio, and that's where the majority of the long-term radio communication stuff, outside of like Collins, Rockwell Collins, most of those major radios are made by Japanese manufacturers. You've got Yaesu, ICOM, and Kenwood, and then Alinco is like the redheaded stepchild of Japanese radios. They're lower cost. They're not quite as feature filled, but they're
Well, that's if Japan made a high point.
right. It's like a Japanese high point. So basically, the Alincos are great radios. They're well built, as not as feature rich but that shows in your price though too. They're definitely a better radio than a Baeofeng, but you can pick up a DJ 500. You can go to Walford, the I-80 truck stop, and you can go to Walford CB there and pick up the DJ 500 for, I think it's $109, and it's not bad, and it's honestly just leaps and bounds above that. This radio is also a mill standard 810 compliant radio, so I can toss this. I've laid this in water, pulled it out, works fine. You can get some water in the speaker, you shake it out, whatever, but it's fine. Just for dust, for survivability, it's a better radio.
So that would be the one to go with, and then save the Baofengs for like a backup or for like
Right.
your bug out kit or something like that if you want to do that.
Exactly. Baofeng also makes mobile radios for that 2 meter and 70 centimeter range, and those are the two kind of handheld, the same frequencies you get on your UV5R.
Okay.
And in GMRS. So they make mobile radios as well, and you can get those, online. I'm trying to think of what it's the UV25X2, the 25X4. Those are both 25 watt radios. So a big jump up from your little handheld where you're doing 5 watts, 4 to 5 watts. And they also have, and then they also have the 50, the UV50X2, and that radio is like $170, but it puts out 50 watts, and it does that, quite well. I actually built a repeater out of a pair of those that were linked into each other with multiple different antennas. Worked awesome. So, I mean, your flexibility in those radios is great. If you want to step up from that, because they're pretty bare bones, you can tell that's a cheap Chinese radio. I mean, it'll totally work, and I would put one in most any of my vehicles or use it as a backup radio. But I also have an Alinco in my truck for my main radio, for my main mobile radio, for doing that.
What model that is off the top of your head?
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure I can tell you. That model is the DR735T, and I also got
And
that.
that's more of a base station type of a radio, more like a big CB.
Yeah, kind of. It's like your handheld radio on steroids. That's 50 watts out, which is going to let you talk to, many, many miles away. So I use that radio anytime I'm in the vehicle. I used that when I got caught on in California during that wildfire that when I was out that way, and I was able to hit a repeater that was 20, 30 miles away while I'm driving through these forests in California that are on fire, and get them to relay information to me so that I could get the hell out of there. So that's great. Basically that's going to be what you want for a mobile radio. So that's a good step up for that. Now, the next move up from that is going to be an HF radio. So those are your lower frequencies. Those are your big frequencies where you're transmitting hundreds of miles. And so Baeofeng does not do an HF radio. People have been asking them for it, but I don't think they can realistically achieve it with the technology that they use. It's just not substantial enough. For HF radios, that's where you're looking mainly at your Kenwood, Yaesu, ICOM, and then Alinco. And so
Okay.
I have a couple of Kenwoods, and I absolutely love them. My Alinco I got was the DX SR9, and I got that one because it gives you the ability to run readouts directly from your computer, and see the actual whole band spectrum that it can hear. So you can look at it and you can see where activity is happening, and then just tune into that.
Now, with the HF radio, is there any different licensing requirements, or is it just your basic ham license will do that?
With ham, you get a technician license as the entry license, and that gives you the ability to use the handheld radios to do repeater work, and then it lets you use those HF frequencies, but you're limited on where you can use voice or phone is what they refer to that as. So you can only use the 10-meter band, so it's pretty much like CB. The CB frequency is just above that, which means that long distances are really, really cut down, because that CB area, that's a 10 or 11 meter wave, which means it does not bounce off the ionosphere and come back down. So you're relying only on ground wave propagation. That wave will only travel along the ground, and it'll only do that for so long before it dissipates. As you get lower in those frequencies, then the wave is much, much bigger, and you're bouncing that off the ionosphere, and you're able to hit all around the world. So with that 10 meter, that's really the only place with a technician license you can use voice. And that we use that for like regional nets, regional networks. So there are some people who talk just around the state on 10 meters. And that's the way that you would do that. With the next step up from that license is the general license. And that essentially gives you, for the most part, carte blanche to just talk wherever you want to within the licensed frequencies. There are some parts that are strictly restricted for the extra class, where they get just the allowance of a little more power and they get a little more bandwidth frequency to use there. But the difficulty in getting that license is really, really much higher. That's you can bullshit your way through a technician license if you have a basic understanding. If you go like, I kind of get how this works, you can get a technician license without knowing anything else. A general license you have to study a little bit for, because that's where they get into really get into wavelengths and antenna lengths and how do you calculate those things. Beyond that, it taking the extra test feels like you joined like an engineering degree program in electrical engineering. It is stupid hard.
Now, which one of those one of these requires Morse code, correct?
So the Morse code requirement is gone.
Completely?
None of them require that anymore. Yep. So you don't need to worry about learning Morse code anymore. They dropped that requirement several years back, and it made things a lot easier. So my Morse code is terrible. If they had still had that requirement on there, I wouldn't have the licenses that I do. Not to say that Morse code isn't handy, because as a technician, you can use Morse code pretty much anywhere. On all those bands that you can't use voice, you can use Morse code. So that's really, really handy to do. Just the flexibility of Morse code, because that carrier wave that carries the Morse code beep cuts through noise so much better than voice. It's much easier to hear that and pick that out than the up and down and different frequencies and tones within a human voice. So it has its place. It really does. The other thing with HF is that there are a lot of digital modes. So if you have a small packet modem, or you have something else, like I've got my Rockwell military modem up here, you can transmit data over the HF network. And if you ever listen to if you ever heard an old modem, hop online, it sounds like that. It's, that's pretty much what those things sound like. That was how that worked. Modem is modulating and demodulating tones and turning it into data. That's all. That's what a modem is. And so you can get that and move data, but it's not like broadband. You're not moving gigs of stuff, because the actual bandwidth is only that big. So you're talking, majority of the time, if we're doing something for military, and we're using old school HF radio stuff, we're doing like 75 bits per second to 150 bits per second. Not a lot. It takes you about a minute and a half to send a 17-line letter. So, but it'll get there.
What kind of security is on sending a 17-line letter through the airwaves like that?
So the big downfall of radio is that it's just not secure. The upshot is that there aren't a lot of people using radio. So the first thing that you do get via any of that is just security through obscurity. Because there aren't a lot of people listening, your chances of having something be heard is pretty low. The being able to send data over HF, though, you have different modes that you can modulate and demodulate with. So if you have a method of doing that you're going to use, and the person on the other end knows that, then you have that advantage right now. If somebody just comes across that signal and hears it and goes, "Oh God, I want to listen to that. I want to decode it," they got to figure out what mode it is. They have to figure out, what speed that is, and then they have to figure out how to decode that, or to demodulate that. With our military stuff, we use a format called EOM also, which basically has a beginning of message and an end of message. If you don't have both of those, it's just not going to decrypt properly. But then we also do encryption on top of that, so that when we're sending our information, there's a layer of encryption within that on each side. So when I send it through, it's encrypted. When somebody else gets it on their end, as long as they're using the same key that I was, it decrypts it properly. So even if somebody listened to it, pulled it out of the air without the keys, they would just have a big pile of gobbledygook. It wouldn't look like anything at all.
Okay. So I want to get on to repeaters a little bit, but first, number stations. Fact, fiction, conspiracy theory, nut job?
No, they're awesome. They're out there. With the one of the first things I did when I got my Kenwood, when I got my HF radio, was tune around and just listen, because my antennas weren't great at the time. I had a handful of little things that I couldn't broadcast out with. I couldn't transmit out with really well, but you could hear all sorts of stuff. And so basically, I just went up into my attic, crawl space, and just laid down a ton of wire, so that I could run that into the antenna and just receive as much as I possibly could. There are totally numbered stations out there. I have picked up number stations from Cuba and from some former Eastern Bloc Russian-esque countries out there. But there are plenty of just random transmissions that happen that don't seem to have any bearing in anything else, and you go, "Oh, that's something." So they're out
And
there.
it's something along the lines of, like in Red Dawn, Johnny has a long mustache and
Oh yeah,
all that stuff. And some of
Yeah.
that stuff is important, and some of that stuff is just bubkiss over the airwaves, make people go, "What the fuck are they talking about?"
oh totally.
Yeah.
So if you look at some of those, if you go way down in the frequencies, it's like point. God, it's like 0.066.6 is a Russian time station that will beep at specific intervals and then send out a small modulated packet of data. And then every hour and a half or so, they'll just spit some other voice information out. And I don't know what the hell it is, but it's some of I'm sure most of it's probably innocuous and totally innocent, but there's a good portion of weird shit on there too. And if you keep tuning really low, then that's usually where you get the really interesting stuff. The lower frequencies, if you have a modified radio that can tune really low, like my first Kenwood is, then you can, with a big enough antenna, you can start picking up some really interesting stuff. Those are the really long wave. The radio wave is huge. They're really long range, and they don't send a lot of information. It's because the wave is so damn big, and that takes up so much of the space that they can only send so much information. So those are usually 3-line messages to like submarines. You can pick those up and hear those, and it's like, oh, cool. And there are some guides floating out there that have well-known like European and African and Russian frequencies for military use. So you can poke around and listen on those, and there's there's stuff out there.
So, how do you go about finding like repeaters in your area? If you're somewhere you don't know,
Mhm.
where would you? Is there just a website you go to, or are there books, or how does that work?
Yeah, especially if you are doing a UV5R, one of the things I would say is get a programming cable and get Chirp. And Chirp is a free program. It's online. It lets you modify some of those settings. It's what I use on the rig in my truck to do the programming when we do that stuff. And that does a ton of radios. It's not just the Baeofeng stuff. It's not just the UV5Rs. It's a ton of them. And you can use that, and basically you can pull down a menu within Chirp, and it'll say repeaters, and you put in a zip code, put in a zip code or a location, and how far out you want to look and what frequency band you want to look on, and it'll just populate a list, and then you can just dump that right into the memory of your radio. But otherwise, there's places out there like Reeve is the name of it. And what's that?
RadioReference.com. To give you a support.
Yep.
It gives you that anything in your local area.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, any businesses that use a hand radio or a certain frequency set. I mean, it gives you the list for like Arby's, Hardee's, all that. It also gives you business accounts. It gives you the frequency of which their repeaters are actually running at, and then you can program the Baeofengs to actually tag into that.
Yep.
That'd be where you're asking for, Romy, as in a place to actually look up the radio frequencies that you'd want.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the radio reference site has a bunch of that stuff, although it's some of it can get outdated. So like I know in my area they list a ton of frequencies for the university, but most of those are no longer in use. Probably haven't been for about 5 years. So it's hit or miss on whether those that you want to search out are right, but a lot of the other ones are fine. So, I put in the like the North Liberty dispatch radio and the Johnson County EMS dispatch radio, and those are exactly the same. They were totally dead on. And so periodically I'm driving and I'll, get a notice that somebody OD'd in Iowa City and they want to send somebody out. So, you hear all that stuff.
Is there any way to find a repeater, just like if you're out in the boonies and, your truck's broken down out in BFE, is there any way to just find a repeater off of your radio, or do you need to have that signal there?
There are a couple of things that you can do. So most decent hams, if they are listening in, with a mobile or something like that, they have their radios set so that it monitors what's called a national calling frequency. So it's 146.52 on 2 meter, and that's the most likely one you're going to hear people on. And that's just kind of like your catch-all. It's like your channel 9 on CB, or channel 19 on CB. It's just a kind of a meeting place station. It's your back and forth calling if you're going to do that without a repeater. And so normally if you are able to hit that, then you can say, hey, I'm looking for a repeater in the area. Otherwise, you just get familiar with scanning. So there's you have the ability in the Baeofengs and in most any radio to just scan the band and listen for something to come up. And so you're kind of waiting for something to happen. And as the nice thing with repeaters is that they have to identify themselves periodically. And they do that either by a voice notification built into the repeater, or they'll automatically just pop out their call sign with Morse code. And so if you're scanning, you're going to end up hearing those IDs, and then you'll know, okay, that's the frequency of the repeater. The thing with a repeater is that it uses 2 different frequencies. You are basically listening on one frequency, and then you are calling into it on another. So you can find a frequency to listen to, but for the most part, you're not going to talk and be repeated unless you know the input frequency as well. The nice thing is people are pretty open about that stuff, so you can pretty easily get that. But there is like a repeater book app for the Android and iPhone. The other thing though is my first trip down to Texas, when I was driving back and forth to there, I didn't have any of those resources, but I did have the repeater directory from the ARRL, the American Radio Relay League. And that's basically just like a little phone book. Covers all the states and the areas, and you just kind of pull up where you're going to be and look at it and go, oh, okay, well, here's the frequency, here's the output, here's the information that you needed to do that.
Okay. So moving on from radios a little bit. Now I know that you're in the Army Mars, so anything that you can give us to add to different code things that you're not going to get in trouble for, great. But things like, if you're trying to authenticate who you're talking to, if you're trying to basically kind of like that Johnny has a long mustache, different phrases you can put out, stuff like that. So what do we have as far as options for that kind of a thing?
There's a number of different things that you can do on there. Dryad is a really simple, effective method of doing that, and that's basically a coded sheet where you pick a column and you pick a row, and you
like
identify something.
An example right here. Is this about what you're talking about?
Yep. So, the way that you would authenticate off of something like that is that you would say, this is Dave Flank, and I need you to authenticate B, and then so the B, the first one identifies the row that you're in. The
Yeah.
second thing identifies what one of the letters or numbers in that row. And as long as you have the same sheet as somebody else, what they'll do is they'll come back and they'll identify themselves and they'll say, I authenticate, and then give you the digit directly below the second one that you said. So if you said, authenticate B, whatever, can you hold that up for me? Great, thank you. So if I said authenticate 2, 3, then basically you would look at row 2 and go over to column until you found the number 3. And then the person would come back and they would say, I authenticate 4, because that's the digit directly below the one that I read off to them. The sheets are incredibly flexible.
And there are other ways that you can do this too, because I have, like, if you look down at the bottom, I have a second number column. So one of the ways that I have seen to open this up is, like, for example, you want to authenticate 1 alpha, then I would authenticate 332, and that gives that number that's at the bottom of the column, that adds to it. And that's another thing you can just memorize the pattern of alpha would be 32, Bravo would be 23, and then that's one thing that you can know yourself. So if you authenticate this as, just as you said, if the guy comes back with 4, for example, you know the guy on the other end is bullshit because he didn't have the proper authentication that's added to it that's not on the list. So yeah, there's a number of different ways that you can set these up and use them and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, let me see. I think I have an old table here that I am gonna pull up real quick.
And that is something that you can set up within your own small group, your own assistance group in your local area. We talked about call trees, and I want to touch on that while we're in this chat. But you go through your call tree and you're on the radio trying to get a hold of people and stuff like that. That's one way that you can authenticate locally, and then anyone else listening doesn't need to know what's going on because they're not part of that local group.
Right. Yeah, it's one of those things where there's so many different methods that you can use to get that all figured out and to figure out a good way to do it. The thing that you want to make sure of when you're doing any kind of an authentication, challenge, a call, response, or any of that stuff, is that you're not reusing something over a long period of time. So with military stuff, we would look at using a table to encode or decode something, and we would really only have 15 digits that we would be able to use out of that before we change to a different portion of that table, so that we're not giving somebody the option of getting all of that figured out. So we would give them 15 and then say authenticate and find another row to identify another row to use in that table.
Yeah.
So there's definitely some limitations within that. Let me pull this up here and kind of show one of the more substantial sheets here if I can find it. I've got it. Okay. That's my dog going crazy. Okay. So if I pull up a Dryad sheet here.
Okay, well, while you work on that, I'll start touching on call trees some.
Go for it.
So basically, the way a call tree would work is, since we're spread out geographically, one person initiates the call. They see something going on, whatever. That top tier person initiates the call. They call 3 people. Those 3 people are responsible for organizing their area. And if there's more areas, they're also responsible. Let's say, like for your example, there's 2 of you in that area. So your third would be to call down someone in southern Iowa. And then they initiate the call in their area and stuff like that. So that way you basically have there's less people overlapping each other when they're trying to call. And then you basically can work on alternate methods of communication through your individual areas. So like if all you have are those Baeofeng radios and you have limited range with them, you still have a second option. Whereas if the phone system's down, or if your cell phone's not working, stuff like that. So that's why you start branching out, but you stay local with your call trees. And that, we just need to get that set up. So anything to add to that?
No, I mean, that makes sense, and that's how we would have done it. That's how we did it via the guard and all of that. So, I mean, that's a really solid way to do it, and it makes sense. I mean, you don't overextend yourself, and you don't get within an area where you're not going to be able to contact somebody.
Because then you only have those 3 people you're responsible for. So if you can get a hold of 2 through a primary means, it basically runs off a P.A.C.E program. Your primary means would be regular telephone, right? Your alternate could be text message or email. Your secondary or your emergency could be the radio. And your emergency, your absolute last case could be just driving to their fucking house, knocking on the door. Hey, dude, we need to go.
Right.
So it's just basically running down what's going to work the best and then deciding off of a group, grids down, phone systems down, stuff like that. There you go.
Right.
The phone system is actually built, even though a lot of it runs on fiber optics, that it can still power itself as long as you have an old phone that's plugged into the wall or you have a cordless that's on a battery backup. Most all fiber optic systems, you have 8 to 10 hours worth of battery life before the phone system dies.
Right.
So
that's one of the reasons that I tell people not to ditch their landline phone through a traditional phone company and just get an extra cell phone, or just get a phone through a cable company that offers it that way, because that's going to be relying on too many other things and not your actual transmission lines going from copper from your house out to the box and fiber back to the CO where you're actually getting things powered. It makes a huge difference. Let me see if I can screen share real quick, and I'll show this. I don't know why it doesn't show that, but yeah, share. All right.
Hey, it did stuff.
Hey, neat. So this is a dryad sheet, and this would be one of those where I could use that and say authenticate G Q, because I'm smooth, and then somebody would say I authenticate I, because that's the one directly underneath there. Now, the thing is, you can always tell somebody as well that I'm going to encode things. If you look at the very top, you've got A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, and then you've also got numbers. And so you can send simple, short messages that way by saying, I authenticate G, to let them know what row you're using. And then you could say, with that, you start just giving letters to identify stuff. So I could say I, G, N, and that spells Pat. So then, you know that you're talking to Pat. We're talking about Pat. We're talking about Pat here. So that's one of those things that makes it pretty flexible, but you're still limited because you can't get too complex.
So on that row,
Uh,
basically, you would call out that IGN, and it would be on the G row, and then you just go up to the letters
Yep.
that were up top, and that will tell you your actual letters that you're trying to say.
Right. That's how you decode that. The only limitation with that is that you don't really have an identifier numbers. You just kind of have to know that that's what you want to look at for a number. So you have to, look at it and go to decode it and go, well, shit, that doesn't make sense to have a P there. And you go, oh, well, it must be 2 then, or whatever it is.
Okay.
You have to do, a little bit of assumption work with that, just certain things. But that's why it's made for the simple, short message as far as that goes. But it can get you through pretty much anything that you need. Even if that is a simple message that tells you some other way you want to communicate with somebody, whether that's mail or smoke signals or semaphore flags or whatever.
Now there are, and the other thing too, using radio waves, what I've talked about before in our groups when we're actually chatting, is basically a plain talk code where some groups, some certain clubs can basically sit down and have a conversation about doing illicit things, and people just think they're talking about, cooking last weekend or something. Like my brother and I, we've worked in heating and cooling for decades. Not my shop anymore, but I still come down here and use everything. But we can sit there and we can have a whole conversation about something. And if we're talking about a furnace or we're talking about something else, who's to know? That's one way that you can go through and do these codes. It's kind of a thing where if you don't run with the group for decades, you can kind of assemble one off of common knowledge of each other. So like if we reference something that happened in the past, trying to think of an example. I can't think of an example to use, but there are ways that you can use a plain language code like that to where you're talking over the open airwaves, you're talking in public, stuff like that. Everyone in the group knows what's going on. Everyone else is just an innocuous conversation. And that takes time and practice with the people you know. And then that goes into codes too. Like we had a go code at one point, my brother and I, where call them up and be like, hey, I have a freon leak in my drain pan and the heat exchanger is missing. To people who don't know that much about heating and cooling, that doesn't sound like much, but to us, it's time to go. So, you have anything you would like to elaborate on with that?
I mean, we had no. I mean, it's a really common thing for gangs to have that, just because they need to hide illicit activity. It's common for motorcycle clubs. Not so much the street gangbanger kind of groups, just because they're really dumb and they tend not to hide that shit really well. But the for the rest of it, for most other people, it makes sense to be able to do that. And that's the whole the whole similar thing with the number station or whatnot. It's something that might not be evident to everyone, but to the right people, that makes sense, and that's an indicator. I think at one point when I was in the Guard, our activation code, if we got a call on via our call tree system, was something like the cows are loose in the pasture. And you just get a phone call and somebody verify they're talking to you and just say the cows are loose in the pasture, and you go okay, and you call somebody, and then you'd head to the armory, and that was just how it worked. But it works really well, because then you're not putting as much at risk by discussing those things out in public if it's something that you need to hide or just want to keep concealed for a period of time.
And there's a lot of other ways you can signal also. There's like if there's a physical signal, like just carrying around some chalk. If you and your group all operate in the same kind of an urban area and you notice something going on, like, I don't know, let's say you went to pay your power bills and stuff like that in person. It's great. You can talk to people, you can listen, all kinds of wonderful things you can find out paying your utilities. Just being out in general public, all right? People whisper and talk and all that stuff. So let's say you go to pay your utility bill and you hear about power rationing, or you hear about group A coming in to do this or whatever. You pick up on something like that, you can go and, let's say your signal is to make a mark on the side of a building with some chalk or something on the sidewalk. It's innocuous, no one knows anything, but that's your we need to meet up and talk signal. So that's one way you can do it. If you have, let's say you drive kind of in the area, one of your, like I've spoke of before, one of your routes that you can take, your alternate route to get home or something like that. And let's say you have, if your garbage can is leaning up against this side of the house instead of this side, that's a signal something's going on. There's all different kinds of ways you can run a signal like that. And you can run signals like that at home too. So if you're coming home late and you see that the porch light's not on, that could mean something, and so on and so forth. But it's just coming up with all these different things, working them with your group. So radio isn't the only way to communicate. There's just I still have your tripod, and I've told you this 4 freaking times.
I know. I just keep forgetting about it.
So, but anyways, yeah, there's, like I say, there's a number of different ways that you can communicate, and it's just coming up with them.
Yeah.
And there's a number of different ways that you can code stuff. There have been codes for years that people have used that are just ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, if you, like I said before about the security through obscurity, I mean, it's that goes right back to the Navajo code talkers. You know, if you've got a way to talk that makes sense to you but not to someone else, awesome. Then you can use that. And if you got a way to signal somebody else, and that is, that leads back to CIA tactics. And there's a kind of a CIA operator handbook that got unintentionally released or declassified at some point, and that has a whole lot of that stuff. The shoelace code was in there. It was basically the way that you tied your shoes, so you could walk up and not actually talk to somebody at all about anything that you needed to say, but how they laced and tied their shoes told you everything that you needed to know, as long as you were aware of that code. There's all sorts of just shit like that works great. So radio is not the end all be all for everything, because there are still power requirements for radio. There's still a number of other things there, and again, radio waves are just floating out in space. Thousands of years from now, somebody else is going to hear that fucking thing that I said on the radio on another planet, if they're listening. So you got a lot of different methods to do that, though. Whether that's flashing lights or a sign in the window or whatever, as long as everyone agrees on what is the common indicator for a certain situation, then you're good to go. You can make anything a code.
And challenge codes don't always have to be on a graph too, because in World War II they just used single words. Like I think it was it thunder and flash or thunder and clap were the authentications in between soldiers who parachuted in after D-Day. So and you yell thunder and you get nothing back, you shoot the bastard. That was pretty much how it worked. And then they had those clicker things that sounded like crickets. There's another way to call your people in. So
one of the things that we would do with military radio, if you're under the impression that you have been compromised, so you feel like somebody is listening in on your net, on your discussion, then you have people authenticate, verify that they belong there, but that still doesn't tell you if somebody's just sitting there listening. But you can then use your authentication to tell them to move to another frequency. And so even with that, we would never just say a frequency. Every frequency has a just a call code assigned to it. So I'd say we're going to move a net move to Zulu 1-3. And then everybody looks that up or knows that, Zulu 1-3 is this frequency over here. And that way you can shift that away and get away from a situation that you think might be compromised. Or ultimately, we can also just use that to say, we're going to discuss that elsewhere. I'm going to call you, or I'm going to drive to your house, or I'm just going to send you a letter or whatever. So it's a good way of moving that around.
Well, and that's the thing too, that because aside from the Snowden file dump and all that stuff, every single thing digital is filed, cataloged, and recorded somewhere. All of it. So be it radio waves, be it text message, be it email, that's all being logged at various points. So if you start acting and communicating as if you're under surveillance, this is going to become a more natural thing. So go ahead.
No. I mean, that's a big thing that we had an issue with not terribly long ago, was just operational security and comm security and personal security. We recently found out that the Chinese and Russians are actively running programs to identify and disrupt various military stations, even the volunteer auxiliary stations, because they know that those are integral to backup plans. If there's an EMP that knocks out standard communications, or satellite communications are disrupted, and we bring in the Mars group through the Army or the Air Force to provide a backup layer of communication, and they know where we operate, they know how we operate, and we have somebody on a net who says, yeah, luckily I'm only 2 blocks away from the grocery store in such and such town. Well, he's just given away a big piece of personal security that identifies that person, who can then be located, and chances are that guy's got authentication codes, and he's got other stuff sitting around, and frequencies and all that shit. And so we've really made a big effort to drive that home, and just say, look, be cognizant of the fact that somebody is listening all the fucking time. All the time. Assume that somebody is always listening, so that whatever you're going to say, you are confident that you are either not giving out any information that's critical, preferably nothing identifying, or B, that you're truly secure. But I mean, basically, if you just live by the motto that you're always being watched, or always being listened to, significantly easier to just scale all that shit back.
Like in your case with the radios, I mean, they can triangulate and they can do stuff like that, but they've got to be on the ground in order to find you that way, don't they?
Well, yeah, yes and no. But I mean, like I said, if somebody literally just said, "Oh, I just live right behind the McDonald's here in Iowa City," then if they were listening in, so if the Russians were listening in, I guarantee you that there are Russian agents operating in the United States. If they wanted to, they could go, "Oh, well, this guy has access and authentication codes, and he's got clearance. He probably has some documents. And what's going to stop them at that point from saying, huh, how hard is it to find the guy with a big ass antenna that lives behind McDonald's in Iowa City? Well, let's knock those out and see what we got.
Well,
and
then they've got two options. I mean, if they are going to do some kind of a first strike thing, they can bust in, get all that stuff from you before they strike, or they can bust in now and just get it to have it so they can start breaking it down later.
Right.
So,
right.
yeah, there's a lot of different issues with that.
Yeah. I mean,
it's
if you've got that info there,
because you are.
Yeah. Yeah, you are. We identified that one of our Army nets was up online. Somebody had recorded it and put it through there, and luckily it was a great example of good OPSEC the entire time, and nobody gave anything out. But damn, it makes you sweat just to go, well, shit. Anybody can be listening all the time. There are scanners that can pick up cellular bands. Now, for some providers, that's less important than others. Some do digital, transmission. Some don't. Everything technically is digital now, but there are still, unencrypted, unencoded voice data flying around. So people can listen to that. I mean, I had a buddy with a scanner that could pick up cellular bands back when I was in high school. And we, listened in entirely to a conversation of a guy in a car phone that was next to us in the mid 90s. He was breaking up with his girlfriend. It was very interesting. And we all kept looking over at him going, hey, buddy. And he's going, oh, you fuckers. And then he had no idea we were listening in, him, breaking up with his girlfriend. So, had he had any inkling of that, I'm sure he would have cut off the conversation. So you just assume that you're being listened to, assume that you're being watched. Develop ways of securing yourself and your communication strategies, and identify your plans within your group. So we've got our core group of people that we train with. We're already working on identifying systems to do that. We're saying, okay, these are the frequencies we're going to use in the event that something happens. These are the ways that we're going to contact each other in the event that something happens and we need to. So there's a lot that goes into that. But
and as I've said, when we're planning and doing all of that stuff, absolutely nothing digital in the area. Phones, everything is away. If you think for an instant that if you take your phone and you just happen to brush across that thing with the code, that code's garbage. Yeah. Because even though it may not be active and you may not be under surveillance, you might be. And even if you're not, if you take a picture of that code and send it to someone, that code's automatically digitally stored. Because everything goes through nodes, and then that all ends up in a fusion center somewhere that they can. You're not being actively watched. There's not enough NSA, FBI, CIA, alphabet agency guys in this world to sit there and listen to you break up with your girlfriend on the cell phone. They don't give a shit. But all of that stuff is stored, and it's compartmentalized for later. So if they decide, hey, let's take a look at this fucking guy, let's go back and get the last 10 years of his data. Then they can go back and look through all that data. Legally, they really can't now, but that's why they're storing it, because eventually they're going to change the law so they legally can.
Right.
So everything that you do digitally, just keep that in mind.
And here's one of the other things to keep in mind too. If you were aware, just a couple of weeks back, there was a huge it wasn't really a hack, it was just an exploit of network connected printers. So I had one person at work who had their printer on the wrong port. They had it on a public port. I came in Monday morning and they're like, oh, my printer just kept printing until it stopped and ran out of paper. I went, oh, okay, weird. I took a look at it and went, oh, it was compromised. Somebody knew that exploit and they used it to basically attack all of these publicly available, poorly protected printers, and sent shit out. So sending shit out to somebody's printer is one thing, but if they have access to your printer, most decent office printers, copiers, laser printers have a small chunk of either flash memory or a hard drive in them,
Ours
they
at work has a hard
store-
drive. Yeah.
and it stores the shit that you print, because you know, you send it to the printer and it stores it, and it relays it back up and actually prints the fucking thing. But the problem is you have no idea what's still on that drive or what isn't, which is why it's critical, if you ever get rid of a printer, to run through all of the methods to clear that out. Because say that compromised printer was in the hospital, and suddenly they have access to all the medical records that were printed on that. Or if it was in a financial institution and they have access to all of those financial files.
Like in our case, we've got tons of financial records from customers. So we actually had to have it repaired a while back. I don't remember exactly when. And one of our IT guys basically had to stand there and watch the guy while he repaired the unit.
Yeah.
Just because of that security measure. Yeah.
And you'll have things like that. And even if it's not anything else, if you go back to assuming you're always being watched, and think about how important or how critical you are to various situations. So for me, I have multiple roles that I work in for work, for hobbies, for other things that could afford me different information that somebody might want. So not only do I want to protect that information, but I want to make sure that I am protecting myself so that I can't be compromised by something else that I say or do. Because there are plenty of people, if you look at the history of sabotage and corporate espionage and things like that, there are plenty of people who did various things, not because they wanted to, but because they felt that they had to, because they had been compromised by some information. If Pat prints off a picture of his dick on his printer and somebody remotes in and gets it, and then they, share that with the world, or they're going to, they say, "We're going to send this out here, Pat." And he goes, "Oh God, I wasn't thinking about that. That was a terrible idea. You're right. What do you need?" And they say, "Well, we want you to, whatever, drive a dump truck, into this bridge." I don't fucking know. But then they have compromising information, or they have some leverage over you. And so, I mean, it's just critical to pay attention to all of those things, because it's all important.
Especially with the way everything is on some form of digital media these days. So I've started into the field of IT security, and just the first little bit of my classes, it blows your fucking mind just how easy it is to exploit some of this.
Oh yeah.
And it's always the people that are the exploitable part. I mean, you can have the best systems in the world, but if you have a person whose password is password with $2 symbols in it or some shit like that, or they get some compromising information like a dick pic from Pat off his printer, like, "Hey, we're going to put this all over the internet. Give us your password, or get us access to this, or plug this in." There you go.
Yeah, there was
there's got to be codes in place also that someone who, under duress, could say in plain English, "I'm fucking compromised." Like, just like with your, "Hey, the cows are out in the pasture."
Yeah.
If there's some kind of a code in place, then we know, okay, this fucking guy did something stupid. Let's shun him a little bit.
Right.
Stuff like that. That's just another way of being able to communicate your situation to the people around you.
Oh yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of things. Just be aware of that shit, and I think you're way better off. But how long are we into this now?
We're into this for about 2 hours, and I would say, unless there's any more questions, we could probably wrap it here.
We can probably wrap up here for tonight, and then if we want to do another commo discussion, or just a general personal OPSEC discussion, something like that, we can do that as well. I'm always up for that, and I know you've got some other shit planned for the upcoming
Yeah.
ones. So
next month, now that we've got the kinks worked out, I'm going to have to get how the hell you did that so I can fix it on my end. So next month, I believe the plan was to do gear storage and things of that nature. So be it long term, be it just keeping shit organized, stuff like that. That's kind of the plan that I had for that. Hopefully we can also get Logan's issues squared away so he doesn't have any more technical difficulties. But I know Mike's out on a smoke break right now, so wait until he gets back, see if he has any more questions. And if there's any more from the outside, if you guys want to chime in.
Right. Definitely. I know that Mike has some really great info and on supplying power during during an event or supplying power to comms. He's definitely very technically minded into a number of those things, and he's pretty deep into. He's really big about picking stuff up and learning it and running with it. So that is fantastic. So he's a hell of a resource. So I know that even if he didn't have a lot to jump in and say during this right now, that chances are he's going to have some other good shit to bring back to the table afterwards, even after he digests everything that we talked about.
Yeah. And I know that the other Mike had some info that he wanted to get out, but he had to work, so he couldn't be with us this time. But I know that he had some radio experience he said he wanted to get out and things like that. So I think we'll definitely touch on this topic again because it is a pretty wide-ranging topic.
Yeah.
And there was definitely some comments once again about you putting on a class to teach us all what's in that big egg head of yours. So
yeah, I'm happy to help out with that. So I mean, we can definitely put that together. I've taken on some other training roles within various other groups, but it's not terrible to get that information together and at least cover those basics. And I think a lot of really simple stuff that you forget after you've been doing it for a while, those things become ingrained, and you forget that not everybody has that experience or not everyone knows that. So even if it's something as simple as covering pro words, which are just the commonly used words, and you'll hear Roger, over, out, Wilco, all those things. It's just knowing when and where to apply those words, because if you wind up in a situation where you're calling in fire support for the military, and you say repeat, that means to re-engage the same target in the same fashion. So if you just mistakenly said repeat and you moved into stepped into an area that they just recently hit with artillery, you're fucked. I mean, you're gonna get blown away. So it's knowing how that shit is supposed to be used is pretty important too. So but it looks like Mike is back. You got anything to follow up on and add before we kick it for the night, Mike?
Do we cover the power consumption? I mean, that is one thing
we
that
covered power a little bit, but if you have anything you'd like to add, now is the time.
the power consumption is going to be a problem. I mean, to be completely honest, if you're wanting to run a mobile unit, I mean, you're looking at roughly about 60 pounds just for a decent battery. And that's going with the solar panel. Now you got a solar panel array playing with, plus the power, plus the inverter. I mean, your weight's going to be the one that kills you. I don't know. It's going to be one of those factors where we're going to have to sit there and figure out what is the more crucial components, like our radios, the flashlight batteries. For the guys that got it, the night vision. I mean, you got guys with night vision on perimeter watch. At night, You don't want them losing their batteries, or you don't want them losing the juice out there. Trying to figure out the equipment that's essential, that actually needs the power, is going to be the big thing that we need to focus on. I mean, we can go hydro, we can do wind, but it's still reliant upon everything else. I mean, your input has to exceed your output. If your output exceeds your input, you're just sitting there spinning your wheels. You're never going to catch up.
And it also depends on the kind of environment too. I mean, if we end up like, I don't know if you guys have ever seen the show, but Revolution, where all the power is just gone. You know, if we end up in like an EMP and all the power is just gone, except for the little bit of devices we can power, then yeah, we're reliant on solar panels. We're reliant on car batteries, making power with hydro. I mean, we could set up an exercise bike and have people just take turns pedaling on that thing to make power.
Oh yeah.
But it's very situationally dependent too.
Well, and you got to remember, if you are tasking somebody to be the hamster in the wheel to act as a generator and generate power, you still have an input and an output factor to that. You are still feeding somebody, and they are using their energy to, you know, do this function. You're taking them away from any essential tasks that they can fulfill besides that. I highly recommend, if you haven't gone and read it, there is a book from the late 50s, early 60s. It was really one of the first post-apocalyptic, dystopian kind of fiction stories out there based in reality. And it's called The Last Babylon by Pat Frank. Fantastic book. I mean, I've probably read it 30 times. I think I first read it in 7th grade, and I think that's really what got me kicked off on prep and everything else that I work with. But they discuss a lot of this stuff. They talk about what's essential and what isn't. They ended up sacrificing one person's car to turn that into plumbing and other shit, because that car wasn't efficient enough to realistically use as a car during the time that they had it. So they wound up using an old Model A and driving that, and that charged the battery that they used to run their radio set to just receive off of that. But eventually, when all the fuel gave out, they couldn't charge the battery anymore, and eventually the battery gave out, and then there was nothing left. So you got to prioritize that. You've got to figure out all that essential information as far as what equipment you're going to need and how to prioritize its use and its maintenance. And I think Mike is just 100% on that. There's a lot of critical decision making that goes into that. Not everybody is going to need a 25 watt or 50 watt mobile radio to carry around. If you look at the military radios, the like prick radios that manpacks that they carried in Vietnam, those are only 20 watt radios. We can grab my tiny mobile in my truck puts out more than twice that power, but it also pulls that much extra power too. That's the reason that they went with a relatively low powered unit, and then taught you a shitload about antennas. Well, how can you set up a field expedient antenna that's going to be more efficient? Because that's not going to take any extra power and be way more useful than just eating up your batteries. And even with those, they were carrying around 25 pounds of batteries on their back. So I love being a commo guy. I don't want to fucking carry around all those batteries.
Have you guys seen where people have taken like ammo cans and turned them into radio base stations, kind of like that?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's solid. If you are aware of your power consumption, if you are aware of your battery capacity, you can totally take that shit and run with it. and have a small mobile solution like that. There are guys in the radio community that do QRP, which is the internal Q code for low power. Basically, it's long range communication using small amounts of power. Most of these guys are using 5 watts and talking around the world. It's a matter of just knowing who you want to talk to and when the right time is to do that. So, we can be smart about what we do and conserve as much of that power as we can. And that's definitely an option.
Yeah, it's actually an option to go with. And like right now, I'm playing with these batteries you guys are using for the night vision, or a couple of our guys using those vapes. Same battery.
Yep.
And trying to redesign other prototypes. All they are is power banks. And this is all the Tesla wall everybody's been talking about for those solar units and stuff like that. Is the Tesla wall. The Tesla wall. That's all they are. Is these little batteries.
Yep. I was going to say, I've got a handful of those. They're from the vape and the other units. These, I've got a supply of these that just came out of old laptops. You got somebody that goes, oh, I'm going to throw out this laptop. If it's got a battery pack that's at least that thick, there's a good chance there's somewhere between 4 and 8 of these things in there. Yeah. Same ones. And you just crack that fucking thing open like
a that are rechargeable and all that stuff too. For the video game controllers that I never use. So
yeah. I mean, we can base everything off there. Like these new batteries that they've been coming out with, they're only designed for rechargeable solar lamps or those solar lights you put outside. They're actually lithium iron phosphate. I mean, I bought this pack of 4 for $10.
Right.
You try to buy one of these batteries, it's $10 by itself.
Yeah.
And it's one of those I'm trying something different because, like I said on our local chat, you can go over to Harbor Freight and get a 35 amp hour battery to run your solar panels or to be recharged by solar panels or any other option. Honestly, it's just a little bit more equipment that is needed to do so. But they're building Tesla walls that are coming out with a kilowatt of power. Let's say most people that are living off grid are using 4 to 5 deep cycle batteries, 100-watt batteries, or 100 amp hour batteries. They're using 4 of them. That's 400 watts just for the batteries.
Yeah.
And they're making a kilowatt. That's 1,000 watts. And they're making it just out of these little batteries here. I mean, it's just a sequence and a series and everything else. But I'm saying I'm trying this prototype just to see if I can get it down and see if the actual weight is bearable compared to what a lead cell battery is.
Yeah.
And as we were discussing before, if you're going to go with the solar panel or any of the renewable energy powers, you need at least a cycle battery. Don't try to use the car batteries. Don't try to use the lawnmower batteries. I tried it. I built 10 years ago. I built the very first solar panel generator of my design. It had an 800-watt inverter, 2-watt solar panel. It works fine. It uses lead cell batteries. And that's the only thing that made it heavy.
Yeah. If you're gonna do that and you're gonna pilfer batteries from something else, boats and RVs, get those deep cycles.
Yeah.
Yep. So, ambulances too. There's usually a tray of deep cycles in there too. If shit's hit the shit and you got a wrecked ambulance you come across, you got batteries and all kinds of shit in there you can use.
Yeah, absolutely. That's like a little gold mine. But I think I should probably call it for the evening. So I think we've definitely got a ton of shit that we can talk about for the next time. You know, whenever we want to get through and cover this subject again, and I can catch up with you later and let you know what I did to get this shit going. So
Definitely.
all right.
So, all right.
All
Thanks
right.
everyone for being on the
Yeah.
panel. Thanks everyone for showing up in the chat.
Yeah.
And yeah, have a good night.
All right. See you guys.